Ironhollow Forge outgrew itself in the second year. The old tannery that Garrik had called adequate became cramped by spring, stifling by summer, and untenable by autumn. Orders backed up. The waiting list grew to 3 weeks. Adventurers camped outside the door on delivery days, hoping to snag a canceled slot. Harlan, the senior smith who'd carved up Thorngate's territory, started sending overflow work, which was both a compliment and an admission of defeat. The new smithy was a converted warehouse on the craft district's main street, twice the floor space, 3 forge stations, a proper stockroom, a customer reception area, and living quarters above for Garrik. The rent was 12 gold a month, triple the old place, but the revenue more than covered it. Ironhollow Forge was pulling 40 gold a month in profit by the end of the first year. By the middle of the second, it was 60. Garrik ran the forge floor. William ran everything else. The division of labor had emerged naturally. Garrik hated dealing with customers, and William was better at it, not because he was friendlier, he wasn't, but because he listened. Every customer. Goblins in which dungeon? The Thorngate one? Nah, the one near Grimwatch. Deeper, better loot. More dangerous, though. The mid-levels have orcs. Grimwatch. Orcs at mid-levels. Noted. Orc patrol tactics. Level 25 threat. 4 unit formations. Noted. What level was the adventurer? 22. Good fighter, but he went in solo. You don't fight orcs solo. He cross-referenced everything against Divine Sage. The adventurer's field reports were roughly 70% accurate. They got the broad strokes right but missed details, exaggerated threats they'd barely survived, and underestimated dangers they'd avoided. Divine Sage filled in the gaps, exact creature levels, territory ranges, population densities, migration patterns. By the time William turned 14, he knew more about the Thorngate dungeon and its surrounding territories than anyone alive. He also had a stockpile. The sword had become part of him, not just a weapon, an extension of the verdant root, a second set of roots that reached into the living world through steel instead of soil. When he held Verdant during cultivation, his mana capacity increased by roughly 15%. When he held it during combat, his reaction time sharpened, his earth sense expanded, and the blade itself seemed to guide his strikes toward weak points in an opponent's anatomy. The worm's spirit wasn't conscious, but it knew things. The accumulated instincts of a centuries-old forest predator distilled into a blade that resonated with every living creature within range. William didn't control it. He harmonized with it. The same way the verdant root. Baron Theron Cast came to the smithy in early summer. He arrived on horseback with 2 guards, no entourage, no announcement. A practical man. William could see it in the way he dismounted, the way he surveyed the building, the way he walked through the door with his eyes cataloging everything. The forge layout, the quality of the tools, the stock on the shelves. The dwarf's work, William confirmed from behind the counter. I'm William. I handle the business. You're young? I get that a lot. Garrik's steel holds an edge 3 times longer than standard forging. We can repair this, or we can make you a new one. New one? And 12 more like it. Standard cavalry pattern, but I want them to last. He set the broken blade on the counter. Can you deliver in a month? 6 weeks for 13 blades. We'd need to adjust our production schedule. We can do it in 4 weeks, William said, but I'll need a deposit of 40 gold up front. Materials. Reasonable. Theron Cast studied him with the evaluating gaze William had come to recognize in people who mattered, not dismissing his age, but looking past it to whatever lay beneath. You run this place like a grown man, William. I had to grow up fast. Theron Cast nodded, turned to leave, then paused at the door. My nephew comes to stay with me most summers. Boy about your age, restless, gets into trouble if he doesn't have something to do. If he wanders into your shop, don't let him touch the forge. He'll burn the place down. I'll keep an eye out. I understand, William said. More than most. Something flickered in the Baron's expression. Recognition, maybe, of a shared understanding about what it meant to be defined by a position you didn't choose. He nodded once and left. The door closed. William stood behind the counter, thinking about dungeons and baronies and eighth princes and the places where all three intersected. Prince Cale arrived 3 weeks later. William knew he was coming before he walked through the door. The town had been buzzing for days about the royal visitor, eighth prince, passing through on a tour of the kingdom's border garrisons, staying with his uncle, the Baron. The market gossips described him as handsome and charming and so polite you'd never know he was a prince. His face was interesting, not handsome in the way the gossips described, more striking. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that was still softening into adulthood, and dark eyes that moved around the forge with the same cataloging assessment his uncle had used. The Cast family eyes, clearly. The ones that saw everything. "Is this the famous Smithy?" he asked. Not to William specifically, just to the room. "It's a smithy," William said from behind the counter. "The famous part is debatable." "William, I own it with my partner. He's at the forge." "Your partner's a dwarf, I heard." The boy leaned on the counter with the easy confidence of someone who'd never been told not to lean on things. "I'm Cale. I need a blade. Repair or new?" "The ore content makes it tricky," William said. "Divine affinity ore has a narrow refinement window. Most smiths would just replace the blade. Can you fix it?" "Garrik can. He's worked with magic ores before." He set the blade on the counter. "It'll take 2 days. The bend needs to be corrected at temperature, and the chip needs to be built back up with compatible steel. We can't use standard patching. The mana profiles won't match." "Everything?" A hint of challenge in the voice, the royal testing the commoner. "Enough to know that your blade has a 3% divine ore content. The grain structure was set at approximately 1,150 degrees, which is slightly too hot for this particular alloy, which is why it chipped instead of denting, and that the royal armory in Dural's capital has been using the same forging temperature for 300 years, because nobody's bothered to update the process." Silence. "I stated a fact. Whether it's criticism depends on how attached you are to 300-year-old methods." The corner of Cale's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, the precursor to one. "I've been listening to weapons masters tell me about proper forging for years. None of them ever mentioned grain structure or mana profiles." "Then your weapons masters don't know what they're talking about." Cale laughed, not a polite royal laugh, a real one. Sharp and surprised, the sound of someone who hadn't expected to be caught off guard. He straightened up, looked at William with something approaching genuine interest, and extended his hand. "Fair enough. Kyle, just Kyle. I'm on leave from the formalities." William shook the hand. The grip was firm, trained, not forced. "William, just William. I don't have any formalities to be on leave from." "Newer than 300 years old?" "Newer than 100,000. Another beat of silence. Cale's eyes searched William's face, looking for the joke, the con, the angle. Finding none. William looked back with the steady calm of someone who'd been lying for 14 years and had gotten very good at making the lies feel like truth. "And you're not going to explain it?" "Not right now." Cale held his gaze for a moment longer. Then he shook his head. A small, bemused shake, the kind that meant, "I don't understand you, but I'm interested in finding out more." "I'll be back." He turned toward the door, paused, looked back over his shoulder. "Do you sword fight? Besides the ones you sell, I mean." "Yes." "Properly? With forms and sparring?" "I won't go easy on you." "I'm counting on it." The grin was quick and bright, and disappeared before it could become unprincely. 2 days, William, just William." He left. The door swung shut behind him. "He leaned on your counter." He did. Royalty doesn't lean. For his sword, For more than his sword. The dwarf's eyes were knowing. You made a friend, boy, whether you intended to or not. William looked at the door. Through the window, he could see Cale mounting his horse in the street, talking to one of his uncle's guards with animated gestures. A prince who laughed at being teased, who wanted a sparring partner who wouldn't go easy, who was stuck between relevance and obscurity and probably felt it every day. Cale came back in 2 days for his sword. He came back in 3 for sparring. They fought in the courtyard behind the smithy, wooden blades, Gulmaris's forms. It quickly became apparent that Cale was well-trained but conventional. Royal swordsmanship emphasized broad, powerful strokes and defensive positioning. The style was designed for formation fighting, for soldiers in ranks, not for the fluid one-on-one combat that Gulmaris's tome taught. Again. They went again. William won, and again. William won. How? Cale demanded, bent over with his hands on his knees, chest heaving. I've trained for years, royal masters, the best in the capital. And you move like... Because I'm not. The verdant root gave him a spatial awareness that no non-cultivator could match. He could feel Cale's weight shifts through the ground, predict his attacks by the pressure distribution in his feet. It wasn't mind reading. It was ground reading. And in a world where nobody had cultivated in 100,000 years, it was indistinguishable from magic. Practice, William said. And different teachers. What teachers? You said you grew up in a church. A book, and a lot of time to think. Cale straightened up, wiped his forehead with his sleeve, looked at William with an expression that was becoming familiar, the look of someone who knew there was more to the story and was deciding how hard to push for it. My uncle says you're too young to run a business this successful. Your uncle is generous. He's not generous, he's accurate. Cale sat on the courtyard bench, stretching his sword arm. I've been around court my whole life. I know what competence looks like, and I know what secrets look like. The words hung in the air. William stood across from him, wooden sword at his side, and felt the familiar tension of a conversation approaching a threshold. I didn't say my methods. You implied it. You're very careful with your words, William. I've noticed. You say exactly as much as you intend and never a syllable more. He leaned forward. I'm not asking you to tell me your secrets. I'm telling you that I'm going to keep showing up and eventually you'll trust me enough to share them. It was a declaration, not demanding, not presumptuous, just honest, in the straightforward way of someone who'd grown up surrounded by court politics and had decided at some point to opt out of the games. I'll be here, William said. Come back whenever you want. Cale grinned, the quick, bright one. Tomorrow? Tomorrow. They sparred every morning before the forge opened. Cale improved rapidly. He was a natural athlete with years of foundational training and exposure to Gulmaris's unconventional style, was filling gaps he hadn't known existed. William didn't teach him the verdant root. Not yet. But he taught him the sword forms that had been lost for 100,000 years, and he watched Cale absorb them with the same hungry intensity that Garrik brought to new forging techniques. After sparring, they talked about the forge, about swords, about the kingdom. Cale described life at court, the tedious ceremonies, the endless hierarchy, the pressure on the older princes to produce heirs, and the indifference toward the younger ones. William described, it is. He drank. The guards don't treat me like a person. The courtiers don't treat me like a real prince. My brothers either patronize me or ignore me. And my father... He stopped, shook his head. He's a good king, just not a present father, too busy being king. What do you want? The question seemed to catch Cale off guard. He turned, looked at William with an expression that was half surprise and half gratitude. Cale was quiet for a long moment. The courtyard was peaceful, morning light, the distant sound of Garrick's hammer from inside the forge, birds in the eaves. "I want to matter," he said finally. "Not because I'm a prince, because of something I actually did, something I earned. Then earn it." Kyle held his gaze. Something shifted in his expression. The moment when a conversation stops being casual and becomes important. "Teach me." "What?" It wasn't a risk-free decision. Teaching a prince lost cultivation techniques would create a connection that could be traced back to him. If anyone discovered what Kale was learning and connected it to the orphan smith in Thorngate, the questions would be difficult. But William had been alone with his secrets for 14 years. Garrik knew about the cure. Ilara suspected something, and now here was a boy his own age, asking to be taught, offering friendship in exchange for knowledge. The engineering mind ran the calculations. Risk, moderate, reward. An ally in the royal family, access to the Baron's dungeon, and something the calculations couldn't quite quantify. A friend. Wind. Prince Kale has a primary wind affinity, with a secondary trace of divine, likely due to the royal bloodline's historical connection to temple blessings. The wind affinity is strong. The divine trace is minimal but present. Wind, of course. It fit. The restless energy, the constant motion, the way Kale moved in sparring like he was always about to take flight. The royal family's divine trace was interesting but not useful for cultivation purposes, too faint to build on. Wine cultivation systems compatible with a sword-fighting practitioner, age 14, athletic, no prior cultivation experience. Requirements, stealth optional. He's a prince, he doesn't need to hide. Combat-focused, buildable foundation, compatible with existing royal swordsmanship training. System, Badaro 78, 431, the Storm Pulse. An aggressive wind cultivation that channels mana through the arms and weapon, creating shockwave-like force behind strikes. Practitioners hit harder, swing faster, and can project compressed air blasts at close range. Combat application, overwhelming offense, breaking guards, weapon enhancement. Weakness, mana-intensive, causes rapid fatigue if the practitioner's channels aren't well developed. System number 201-99, the Sky Veil. A balanced wind cultivation that combines enhanced movement with weapon integration. Practitioners develop both the spatial awareness of the Gale Step and the offensive channeling of the Storm Pulse, but at reduced intensity for each. Combat application. Versatile. Strong offense and defense, no critical weaknesses. Weakness. Slower mastery curve. The practitioner takes longer to become exceptional at any one thing. Sky Vial, the engineer's choice. Balanced, sustainable. No critical weaknesses. But Kale would hate the slow mastery curve. He wanted results, he'd said as much. Not forever, he'd promised about beating William in sparring. The Sky Veil wouldn't give him that fast enough to keep him motivated. Wait. There was another option. Not a pure wind system, a hybrid. Divine Sage. Is there a wind cultivation system that integrates weapon combat from the beginning, emphasizes aggressive channeling, but includes the spatial awareness component as a secondary effect? Something that grows with the practitioner, fast early results but a high ceiling?